Joining me on today's episode is Sarah from NGIS. NGIS is an Australian-based non-for-profit that focuses on capturing and sharing the Indigenous stories and cultural significance tied to the land. All right, Sarah, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to hear about such an interesting initiative that you guys are doing. But before we get into that, I wanted to introduce our audience to yourself and learn a little bit about yourself. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we've got a couple of interesting questions to hopefully share some insights as well.
Okay, great. So my name's Sarah Butler. I work for NGIS Australia. We're, I guess, like a family of geospatially focused companies. So NGIS is a Perth-based company. It's been around for 25 years. And stemming from that, we have 3 other brands at the moment. So one of those is called Lively. So that is a mapping products company. So when we talk about GIS and things that NGIS Australia does, it's really in, advanced mapping, GIS technologies. We're working within the mining industry and transport industries, agriculture would be another space, where Lively is more, mapping for everybody in a company. So whether or not you're in retail and you need your e-commerce to be perfected and delivery systems running on time and being able to track where your drivers are. Mapping products aren't just for GIS professionals anymore, so we have that arm of, our operations and what we do. And another part of our company is Winyama. So Winyama is who runs the Indigenous mapping workshop, which we're here to talk about. But Winyama is an Indigenous-owned geospatial company. The managing director of that company, Andrew Dowding, he's from the Pilbara, so he's from up north. WA is very important to him. Perth is his home now, and he does really wonderful work with mapping and documenting different cultures and language groups, Indigenous language groups around Australia. And my job in all of that is to do the marketing for all of those companies, so all marketing comms for those. So it's a really interesting job. It's very, very rewarding. I get to work with wonderfully diverse groups of people. I get to have different conversations every day. I don't think there's any day that looks exactly the same for me. So I've been at NGIS for almost a year now. And prior to that, I was living in the UK, in London, for 5 years, working for an international think tank based in London and in Singapore, and working primarily to promote dialogue between the public and private sector. And that was a very challenging and again very rewarding time in my career. But I originally hail from Wollongong, so I'm not from Perth. I came here only last year. I'm still settling in and getting used to what work life is like here in Perth. It's very different everywhere I've been. I'm very lucky that I've been able to travel different places and have different working experiences in my career, but Perth is now where I call home.
That's wonderful, and I think that experience, that global experience, would be amazing. I think a lot of our listeners do toss up the idea: should I, take a role overseas? Should I pack up and follow my partner XYZ?
Yep.
Can you maybe share a bit of insight in between the differences between, say, London and Singapore, and now, and probably where you're from, Perth or even Wollongong?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It does take a lot to turn around and think, okay, something doesn't feel right for me. I think that, when I packed up my suitcase and bought the one-way ticket to London, it was a brave move. And I think it took me about 3 years to actually talk myself into doing it. I was completely terrified. Because when you grow up, you grow up in a bit of a bubble. And it's something I say to a lot of people, and everybody agrees on that word and that term. It's a bubble. You feel safe where you are. You've got your support network around you. Like, why on earth would you want to leave?
Yeah.
But for me, it was just about craving. For me, it was a career move for sure. I knew that there was only so far I could go in what I was doing on the East Coast. But a really challenging part for me was that I absolutely loved my job back there. I absolutely loved it. But it was like a glass ceiling. So, I got as far as I could go. And I could have moved to Sydney. I could have 100% moved there. However, I was like, no, that's too easy for me.
That's too easy.
It's too easy, which is a theme throughout my life. It's just things that are too easy. I tend to do the opposite of them and quite extreme. So,
That's actually such a good philosophy, and such an interesting insight into you. So it seems like you're very self-reflective
yeah.
and strategic in that realm.
Yeah.
You know, how did you foster that?
I think, going back to answering your previous question, I think that kind of attitude and that kind of mindset really helps when you're working in a global centre like London. It's a very highly competitive
Agreed.
place. I think the ways that it's different and where that kind of attitude serves you well, and being competitive and willing to step outside the box and be a bit brave, is that there's about 150 to 200 applicants for those jobs in London that are just like you. There is 150 to 200 of you. What sets you apart is your grit, your determination, how many doors get slammed in your face and you just keep going back and knocking. I don't think I could have made it work if it weren't for that. And I don't want to sound like, I think like a bit stuck on myself in that way, for lack of a better term than that. But I was 100% determined to make that move work. I did not want to turn around and come home and feel like I was going backwards.
Yep.
So I was like, nope, I'm here to do this. I think I applied for around 60 to 70 jobs in the first month I was there.
Sure.
I had a visa, it had an expiry date on it, which is the case for a lot of Australians, 2-year youth mobility visa. And that doesn't lend itself well to companies wanting to hire you. So
That's interesting.
You have to be willing to fight for yourself. And I think, coming back to Perth as well, in terms of the professional sense and transitioning out of London and coming to Perth, Perth companies, I think, really know exactly what they want. And that was the vibe I certainly got when I got back. I didn't come back and think, because I've worked in London, everybody's going to want to hire me. I still have to work just as hard.
Sure.
But it's just about taking those skills and that knowledge you've taken and applying it into different industries. And that, I think, is the key.
Okay. Well said. I think that's very inspirational. Did you find knocking on doors in Perth any different, or in any way different to Singapore or UK?
I found it harder. Surprisingly enough, I found it harder. I found Perth businesses to be a lot more closed door. Like I felt like I was a bit of an outsider actually when I came here, because I'm not from Perth. I don't have a network here. I'm starting to build one slowly, and I'm not the kind of person that likes to rely too much on other people to get to where I'm going. I work really hard and try and do that myself. But I did find it tremendously difficult when I got back from London to find work. Granted, it is a much smaller city than in London. However, I think that there are businesses in Perth and companies in Perth that are doing really, really exciting things. And if you can get your foot in the door, it opens up wonderful opportunities for you. I was very lucky to find the job at NGIS Australia. That has, I've gotten to do some really wonderful work since being there. But for sure, I think that getting my foot in the door was harder than I expected it to be, because it is a very close-knit, tight professional community here.
I see, and I think that's fairly accurate from an outsider's view and from an insider's view. I think that's pretty spot on. You touched on some amazing stuff that you're doing at NGIS. So why don't we get down to that and really drill in on this amazing workshop that you guys have had recently, and tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about the purpose and who was involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Indigenous mapping workshop in Australia is only in its second year at the moment. So we did run a pilot year last year, and that was held in Sydney at the Google offices, and it was really run by Google. I think the first and most important thing to note is that it's an international network of Indigenous mapping workshops. So it started in Canada, It's been in New Zealand for 4 years, and now it's come to Australia. But Google actually approached Winyama, who's the company I mentioned before, Andrew's company, to run the Indigenous mapping workshop in Australia. And I think there are a few key strategic reasons for that. Number one is Andrew is an Aboriginal man. He has been working in Aboriginal philanthropy and mapping activities for quite a long time, and for him it started very organically. So he started out by just mapping his elders' knowledge out on country and getting them to record and tell stories about different places on the map, and sort of trying to capture that knowledge before it's too late.
Sure.
And just through doing activities like that and word of mouth, he was able to build a very substantial community and knowledge base of people who wanted to do similar types of work in their communities. So it made sense that his company take that on. And then we brought it here to Perth this year. So the idea is that it'll be a travelling workshop. We want to try and keep it as grassroots as we can. We want to make sure we're getting to people who really need the training, really need the support, that wouldn't otherwise be able to get it. And we want to make it sure that it's accessible for people, because really the purpose and the involvement of us, so, Winyama doing it, we're just a facilitator for the greater good. There's not enough funding and there's not enough training in Aboriginal communities to help them learn how to use digital technologies and increase their STEM skills.
Sure.
For them to be able to, tell stories or teach people about their culture or put in native title claims. It's harder for them to do that because they don't actually have the resources at the moment. And we had a very vigorous application process. That's the other thing that was quite unique to this workshop, is that it's not just open for anyone to come to.
I see.
You have to really tell us why you need this training and why you've got a gap in that skill set and what the mapping training is going to help you do in your community. And from that, we realised that out of the 110 applications we received, 67% of people said that it was a lack of training and a lack of funding that was stopping them from achieving their mapping-related objectives. So Indigenous Mapping Workshop is here to try and bridge that gap.
Wonderful. Well said. I think for our listeners, this is such an interesting topic, because we never even heard about anything like this. Certainly I haven't. And what does for our listeners to try and understand or visualize the end goal or the end product, can you outline that? So once you've run these workshops and you've trained up people and people have started to use this tool or this process, what's the end game?
What can they do?
Yeah,
so our attendees, just to give you an idea of the cross-section of attendees we get, are primarily from ranger groups working on Indigenous protected areas, which are IPAs. We have language and cultural groups, we have native title organisations, we have land councils. And when they receive the training, when they go back home, the idea is that they can use these tools right away for the different things they need it to do. So the ranger groups, for example, in their IPAs, they might be tracking a certain species or an endangered species on country. And so this is usually achieved by them having paper surveys and writing things down and citing things as and when they happen, and it's not really being done so much in digital format.
sure.
Whereas if they can create a mobile-based mapping application and send their rangers out, as long as they've got an internet connection or the GPS switched on, you're able to locate on a map exactly where you are, exactly where you've cited something that you're tracking.
That's impressive.
And then you can share that. So there's another level to it. It's about taking that knowledge and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we've found, these are the outcomes of the work that we're doing. But it's already in a format where it doesn't have to be digitalised, it can already be shared with others. Likewise, language groups and cultural groups, arts groups, they might be using maps to show boundaries of different languages being spoken, different dialects. So Andrew actually told me this story. It's a great story. Recently for NAIDOC Week, he did a presentation for the NGIS team, just to give us a bit of background about where he's from and how he got started in mapping, and when he got to learn geospatial tools, what that really unlocked for him. And he said to us, I can't really understand the guys that are my neighbours. The speaker, we sort of understand what each other is saying, but we have different words for everything. And Aboriginal Australians have hundreds of different languages that they speak. There isn't one unified language. And it's really interesting to see on a map exactly where those boundaries lie, what those language groups are, place names, what the place names are. Australian government organisations sometimes don't always have the correct Aboriginal names documented for places. And so for a lot of these organisations and these groups, this is their way of being able to present this information in a way that's easy for people to understand, easy for people to digest at a glance and go, oh, okay, I get that now. It's not on sheets of paper. It's not being filed away in a cabinet.
Right.
It's ready to use.
Yeah, sure. So I imagine at some point down the track we could log on to something similar to Google Maps and see, let's take WA for example, and see the different regions, perhaps the different even cultural landmarks, and then also learn a bit about the stories of that land.
Yeah, I think in the Perth context, actually, one of my colleagues, Marinda, she is now working for Winyama, but she started working for NGIS only a month and a half ago, worked on a map which took an 1838 map of Perth and what Perth looked like.
Right.
Digitised that and so put it into a mapping platform. And over the top of that, she actually overlaid the Aboriginal place names in Perth for different places. And it is completely different.
Wow.
To any kind of knowledge or information that had been shared before. I mean, maps back then didn't have any Aboriginal place names on them. And so what we're able to do with this technology is actually make it easy for people to see, okay, well, this is what Perth looked like in 1838, and have that overlaid with the correct information about what the different what the different place name groups were in Perth at the same time. And it brought up some fascinating insights about Perth. And I use Perth because we're obviously talking about Perth, we're in Perth. But this building, for example, was completely underwater.
Wow.
Yeah. So at the back of Government House, there's a water feature, and that was actually the shoreline of where the Swan River is. The information on the map, the old map, has, Kings Park noted. But we have now got the Aboriginal name for Kings Park noted there too. And different places around Perth. And it's about taking parts of history that are, just as important as they always were, but also making sure that the Aboriginal heritage and attribution is there. You could be able to log on to Google Maps in future and be able to see all of that. And in fact, at the workshop, we did a really amazing iconography exercise where we worked with everyone coming from all these different communities so that they could have Google Maps icons that show different sites.
Oh, wonderful.
You search for a restaurant, right?
Sure.
And you see a knife and fork inside of a location pin. There are no location pins that exist that are made for Indigenous people to show on Google Maps where a sacred site is, or where a camp is, or a waterhole is. And so what we've been able to do as a result of the Indigenous Mapping Workshop is create those icons. So yes, hopefully, who knows when it'll be, we hope that Google will roll those out, and that when you search a place on a map, you'll be able to see the important Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander areas.
That's impressive. A bridge was kind of drawn in my head, and in a way, to if we look at the geospatial mapping and one of the more recent uses of geospatial technology is in things like the Pokemon Go game, and I think there's a Harry Potter game coming out as well, or if not already released. But perhaps in a year or two there's a NAIDOC week, not a game but an app that you can go around and.
Yeah, augmented reality is a massive part of mapping at the moment. I mean, Pokemon Go, like you mentioned, it really changed the way that people are accessing maps. I mean, Uber changed the way that people are using maps. You're right, and different technologies, especially augmented reality, virtual reality. I mean, you can put on a set of goggles right now if you're standing in a location and
Sure.
it goes on and see something completely different. You can work that into mapping as well. Yeah, I think that there are definitely ways for NAIDOC Week or any other kind of Indigenous celebration where companies can be thinking about how they can incorporate knowledge onto a map using things like augmented reality. I mean, the possibilities are virtually endless.
Yeah, I'm thinking almost like you hear there's lots of corporate events where it's like Amazing Race and different things where team building exercises. You could overlay something with Perth Indigenous culture into one of those exercises for your team or something like that, and you can go around and actually learn about local history, local Indigenous culture.
Yeah, I mean, the same way of thinking could be applied to tourism councils in different cities. What about what visitors are coming to?
Yeah, sure. How do they access all this?
Exactly. I mean, is there a visitor app that people download when they come to your city? What kind of information does that have on it? Could you have a map embedded within that application that takes people around to different sites where they hold their phone up and they get told a story, a dreaming story that wouldn't otherwise be uncovered, but you're able to educate more than yourself. You can educate hundreds and thousands of visitors coming into Australia.
Yeah, that's
We
impressive.
should be telling those stories. You know, we should be celebrating our Indigenous history.
Let's talk a little bit about the global reach of this initiative, I suppose, and where did it all start, and what's been the global uptake of these sort of Indigenous mapping workshops?
It started in Canada with Indigenous Mapping Workshop in Canada by a man called Steve DeRoy, who we were really lucky was able to join us for this year's Indigenous Mapping Workshop in Perth, because I will say he's a tremendously busy human. he is anywhere and everywhere at once. He's very hard to grab on emails, but he is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met, and I'm so glad he could be here for our workshop because he's kind of like the godfather of the whole initiative.
Okay.
He was the reason it's now in New Zealand. He is the reason, along with Google Earth Outreach, that it's now in Australia. And he's actually piloting workshops in Guatemala and Peru as well with their Indigenous people. But he's been running the Indigenous Mapping Workshop in Canada for 6 years and has trained over 1,000 people, Indigenous people in Canada geospatially, and more or less to achieve the same outcomes we're trying to achieve here in Australia, just making sure our Indigenous people have all the digital skills they need to tell their stories, to sort of fight their corner if they need to, if it's to do with natural resources and land management and water. Some of the people in his community chanting in the background, and he was visiting different places on the map that were of sacred significance. And then at the very end, he got to one particular very sacred burial ground, and a YouTube video popped up, and it was an ad from a real estate agent from last year, I believe it was, saying what a great investment property this would make, X amount of acres of land ready for you to move into. And that Indigenous land and those burial grounds were being pitched to people to basically build houses on top of, and he was able to use that map to stop the development from happening. So it's overwhelming how important the impact is of what this mapping training can do. And as an international network, that the bigger it gets, the stronger it gets, the more the message is being understood that Indigenous voices and stories need to be heard.
I think that's such an interesting example where this is real. This means something to a lot of people, and I think that's really a good way to shed light to our listeners. Now, if our listeners wanted to learn more about this and find out more, how do they read more? How do they reach out? How do they get involved?
Yeah.
I'll let you.
Yeah, sure. So we have a website, as any good event should have a website. So it's g.co/earth/INW-Australia. Our social media profiles are really where we like to communicate a lot of what we're doing. So we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on Twitter. Maybe next year we'll branch into Instagram. We'll wait and see.
Sure.
But being in our second year, we just try to keep it at a more grassroots level. We had no social media for the last one that we did. So we're just trying to build those communities. So if you are interested, please do follow us. We will be sharing a lot of the outcomes from this year's Indigenous mapping workshop. Particularly, we gave out $30,000 in grants to attendees of the workshop. All of the attendees were given the opportunity to make a pitch for the grant funding, so 3 $10,000 grants, to help them get their mapping projects off the ground. Again, that statistic that I think it was 67% of people said that there's no training or funding for them to help achieve their mapping related objectives.
Sure.
But thankfully, with our sponsorship and the enthusiasm that we were met with when it came to getting sponsors, meant that we were able to use some of that to give back to the communities. So we'll be putting posts up on our website, on those social media profiles, about the 3 winners that we selected, their projects and what they've been able to do with that funding. But moreover, we're going to be in touch with our attendees, asking, they're able to ask questions there. We can answer questions from people who maybe want to know more about the Indigenous mapping workshop, but we just want to make sure that we have an open forum for people to show the good work that they're doing.
Awesome. And certainly you've got one follower in me. I'll definitely be going onto there and supporting you guys. If I were to change pace a little bit, and this is the Young Professionals podcast, if I move into kind of sharing some professional wisdom, what would you share with a younger self, a younger Sarah, maybe 5 years ago? If there was a couple of key things, maybe, is it too easy? Go in the other direction. That might be one of the key things, but, I'll let you, I won't put words in your mouth.
No, yeah. I've heard a lot of people say, do you ever see sort of videos on social media sometimes where people get asked to write a letter to their 16-year-old self, what would you say? But I've never actually thought
about it, yeah.
Myself. I think I'd say take more risks. I really would, and I think I'm quite a risk-taking person, but I also like to play it safe sometimes. I'm not totally reckless. I think 5 years ago, where was I? I was just starting out in London. I was kind of, tied back there with the ability from a professional sense of what I could and couldn't do with my visa. I'd probably also say do things exactly the way you want to do them. I think when I say take more risks, it's less professional and more personal. So I think that's more from a professional or a personal view, taking risks. But I wouldn't tell myself to do things too differently. I think that I really stood my ground in what I wanted. If anything, I'd probably say stand up for yourself more.
Sure.
Because I think that being a young person and really trying to forge your way in your career, this does sound wise, doesn't it? Oh my gosh. But trying to force your way through in your career and be heard, I think that you have a lot of people giving you advice and telling you how to do things. And sometimes in your heart of hearts, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this who can empathise with this, you really, really, truly know and believe that what you're doing and what you're saying or what you're pitching at the boardroom table is important. And sometimes being a young person surrounded by people who maybe been around longer than you or a little more wiser than you, and it's good to have those people around you to mentor you. I've had some wonderful, wonderful mentors in my career, and for that I'm very lucky. But there does come a point in time where you have to shift that attitude and go, okay, hang on a minute. The mentoring has helped me get to this point, but now I need to stand up and have to say and be heard that what I'm saying is important, and that I now have the knowledge and I've got the wisdom to carry this through. I wish that I'd known that more 5 years ago. I think I was probably more timid than I am now. It does come with experience.
Sure.
But I probably would have done it sooner, because I think that I let a lot of good ideas get thrown on the cutting room floor because I wasn't brave enough yet to stand up and go, no, I believe in this. I think this is going to work. Let me show you, or give me a chance.
Sure.
Give me 3 weeks, 4 weeks to see if I can make this work. And if not, we'll go back to square one. I think I was guilty of lying down, accepting that, but it's something that I tell my team at NGIS especially. I like to take a lot of time out to mentor as much as I can the group of people I have around me. And I'm always saying to Jamie, who's my marketing coordinator, and if she's listening to this, she's going to laugh, she's not going to know exactly what I'm going to say. I'm like, she knows exactly what I'm going to say, and that is stand up for what you believe in. Have the backbone to push back on people who are older than you, people that have been around longer than you've been in, your professional career, and fight your own corner more. That's what I'd say.
I think that's really valid. That's really important in this age of self-doubt, in this age of, you're constantly bombarded by lots of different sources of information, and it's quite overwhelming when you're making big decisions and there's so much to think about. When I look back on what I would tell my younger self, I think that's certainly one thing, is just back yourself.
Yeah.
Just back yourself. The other thing I would say is don't waste time.
Yeah.
I think, and I've mentioned this before in a previous episode, but I think that's really important as well. Really, really important.
It gets better with age. I think it's the frontal lobe developing. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think protecting your time more.
Yes.
I mean, I find myself saying that to the younger guys in our team at NGIS, and even back in London when I was working with some of the crew there. And that came with time and experience too, but protecting your time and saying, not dropping everything you're doing all the time, because we're all at the mercy of being too nice sometimes, and it's important to be nice and cordial and help your colleagues wherever you can. And being a team player is 100% one of the things I'm most passionate about. I will jump in and help anyone if I've got the time for it and to get the job done for the greater good, whatever we're working on. But sometimes you need to say, actually, you know what? I'm just in the middle of something right now. It's super important. I'm here for you. I'm just going to come back to you in about 30 minutes. Protecting your time is really important. We should always be trying to get our job done first before helping others, I would say, where necessary. And that helps with the time management.
Yeah, definitely knowing when to say no.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting slowly better at that.
Yeah.
Slowly getting better at that. And I think one more question, and perhaps I should have asked this at the start, but one thing that I wanted to ask is, who are your professional mentors, and who are your role models, even in the broader business community? It could be anyone, personal or celebrity-wise. But
I was thinking about this recently, actually, because I was having a conversation with somebody about LinkedIn and who are the people that you follow, who are the influencers and stuff like that. And working in marketing, I'm sort of neither here nor there about influencers and things. I think that they hold their value in different industries, not necessarily mine. But it got me thinking that I think a lot of us feel pressured into naming really famous entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson.
sure.
People like that. But then I thought about it and I was like, do you know what? for me, my professional mentors are the people who have touched my life and have helped make me as successful as I am. And I use the word success, it's all relative. I'm very happy with where I'm at. And my version of success is different to somebody else's version of success. And I feel like, you know, what I've done is great and I feel successful. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without the mentors I had around me, none of which I asked them to be my mentors, that they just kind of assumed that role. And sometimes it's not even by things that they say to you or things that they teach you. It's just about the way they act and the way that they behave and the way that they do business, the way that they hold themselves professionally. For me, my first job back in Wollongong, my first proper job, where I was working as a venue manager and marketing manager at Ravensthorpe, which is on the south coast of New South Wales, a gorgeous heritage venue. The owners of that business, Jim and Deborah McCallum, have touched my life in so many different ways, and we're still in touch all the time. And I was talking to Jim only a few days ago for his birthday, and I said to him while I was driving and chatting to him, I said, do you know, people always say to me, you know exactly what to say to people when you disagree with them, and you know how to make them get on your side. And I said to that person, that's because of Jim. And Jim and Deborah taught me things about business that I couldn't have learned from a book. Yep. I couldn't have learned from listening to a webinar or at university or anything. They taught me so much about how to deal with people. So they are two of my greatest mentors and I just adore them. And then another person would be David Marsh, who is the chairman of OMFIF, which is the company I worked for in London. David is an ex-editor of the Financial Times, and he runs the think tank that's based out of London, Singapore, that we're talking about. David is kind of, he was less of a managerial operational leader and more like a beacon of who you wanted to be.
Sure.
So he would be in Germany one day and then he would be in Washington DC and he'd be speaking on panels. He could talk about any topic you threw at him, he would really, really know about it. But moreover, what I learned from him was how to write beautifully. And I had a journalism degree, and thankfully I was able to submit work to David. I saw it as a measure of success. If I could submit a piece of writing to David Marsh and he came back with only 1 or 2 edits on it, I would go down to the pub and have a celebratory drink.
Yeah.
Because he was known for being quite brutal with his edits and the way he does things. Because he was a journalism veteran, you know. He is absolutely outstanding, and I think the way he carried himself in a room, the way he was able to be across so many different topics and passionate about so many different things in the political space, in central banking and in other financial spaces, helped me in the way I present myself. And he gave me a lot of mentoring behind the scenes about just little tips and tricks about speaking to people or speaking in a public setting and things like that. And he's a real legend. Like, he's one of my favourite people. So those 3 people for me have been people that have been absolutely crucial in my professional development and mentorship, and they're the people I see as my sort of major influences. I think there's also something to be said about the people that you have in your team, although you might not. Even though, I guess in a hierarchical sense, you know, you might be the leader or the team lead or the manager or whatever term you like to use in your company. We also have a lot to learn from people who are younger than us.
Sure.
I don't think that a lot of people stop to think about that enough. You can't know everything, right?
Yep.
If anyone in my team turns around to me and says, actually, Sarah, I think we should do it like this, I always stop to hear them out. So business role models, for me, it comes from the top, for sure. You meet some, if you're lucky, you'll meet some wonderful mentors like the ones I just described. But remember that sometimes the people in your team can educate you as well, and that all makes you, and a whole package makes you a better professional.
Agreed. I think that's so important that everyone has something to teach you, and never lose fact of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point to leave it on. And I'd like to thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be here and talk about the workshop. It's been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in my career.
Awesome. And looking forward to the outputs and learning more about the Perth Indigenous culture and all the background behind it. So thank you.
And we'll be doing the Indigenous mapping workshop in Melbourne next year. So that's the newest announcement we've got. Actually, you're the first person to hear.
Wow. Exclusive scoop.
Exclusive scoop for this podcast, guys. It's going to be in Melbourne next year. So it's going to be great for us because we're going to be tackling a whole new market. And I say market because, it's not easy for people to travel around the country to attend an Indigenous mapping workshop every year. So we'll have different attendees and we'll have different people coming. But yeah, it'll be in Melbourne. And if there are any Indigenous young professionals listening that feel like they might get some value out of receiving that training, get in touch with us via the website, via the social media profiles, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn and I can help you out.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the PerthYP podcast. You can find more episodes on our YouTube and LinkedIn pages at PerthYP. Until next time, keep listening, keep growing, and keep connecting.